Good morning. When you look at the empty chair, do you know who's coming? Do you know the schedule well enough to know that it's Wednesday, so it must be Tim? It's not Friday, so Susan's not going to be here. Michael's on Monday. It's kind of easy to know because there's no piano or guitar, so we know that it's not going to be Brian, and Whitney's in the afternoons. But just wondering, when you see the empty chair, you're like, wow, I wonder when Tim's going to show up there. Just curious to know how plugged in you are on our routine here this morning. Good morning. Good to see everyone here this morning. I hope you are feeling great. I hope your morning has already started off really, really well, that you've had a good breakfast. I hope you've had a good time in the Word this morning. I hope you and the Lord have had an opportunity to have a conversation already. Maybe you've had some good conversations with some people around you as well. I just hope that this Wednesday has been a really, really good start to the day. Everybody's doing well? All right. Well, we are excited in this week. I think that you know that as we are getting ready, continuing to lay out plans for our return of in-person worship this coming Sunday. I know you probably know that, and maybe it seems like it's a broken record already, but you're just going to have to excuse us. We're excited about being open again on this Sunday. We had a team here on Saturday that worked and just kind of on their own came and cleaned up the grounds a little bit, worked in the shrubs and the flower beds, and just looks fantastic. They were getting us ready for being here. I drove up Saturday. I didn't even know they were going to be here, but really appreciate all the work that they did. Last night we had a team that stayed pretty late getting the gym ready for worship. Remember, the gym is going to be what we're going to call Safeguard Plus. That's just going to have some extra precautions and some extra protocols, and again, be a limited number of folks that will be in there, under 50 people in that gym. And I haven't walked through there yet this morning, but the pictures that they sent, man, it looks really good in there. And you're going to have sanctuary chairs. That's probably the first question that you're asking. What kind of chairs? The sanctuary chairs, some of the extra chairs that we took out of the sanctuary, are going to be over there in the gym, and it's going to be very, very comfortable. So if you would like to just kind of have an extra safe place when you come and worship on Sunday, that 8:30 service there in the gym, or we're calling it Sanctuary East, or East Sanctuary, that's going to be available to you as well. So we are excited about the return of in-person worship, at least as an option, being here this Sunday. Also, we're going to start to make some kind of a transition on our Hope Moments, just because these were designed to give us a place to connect and to speak to one another when we weren't able to meet in place. And so as we'll be meeting in place again, some of this won't be necessary in the same way. However, we have learned that there is a value to these regular videos, and so probably over the next couple of weeks we're going to start to tweak, kind of redesign how we're doing some of the videos. So you will continue to hear from us every once in a while. Michael will have some things that he does every once in a while. We might even keep his Sunday school lesson going, just both for the time being when we don't have in-person Sunday school lessons, and then also just offering that for folks that can't make it to a Sunday school class, or even offering it for our Sunday school teachers as a preview that they can watch to help them prepare and teach their lesson. I've asked Brian to continue at least one time a week to give us a little bit of a musical preparation for the coming Sunday. So Brian might take a piece on Thursdays at some point of the day on Thursday and say, this is a piece of music that we're going to be using in the worship services on Sunday. Here's why we've chosen this piece. This is why it matters, and just kind of get our minds and our spirits ready to go in that direction. So those are just some things. I'll probably shift and do some things as well. Obviously, I'm not going to finish this teaching series on the disciples before Sunday. So I'll be doing that somewhat. We may shift some of that to like a Wednesday night because we won't be doing midweek activities. So all of those things we still have to figure out. But change is in the air. But that's been the case for 2020, hasn't it? It's been an entire year of changes in the air. It was interesting. Yesterday we were looking for some pictures on our phones, and there are things you can look at just to see messages that you that you sent, and you see all the pictures that you sent in like a group chat or something like that. And so we were going through there, I was going through all of those pictures, and it was really, really interesting to see the moment in pictures when our conversation turned almost exclusively to the virus. Before this date, we weren't really talking about it wasn't this, we were talking about this topic, and we were doing all of these things, and then all of a sudden, almost on a day, from that point on, almost the full content of our conversations has been driven by the virus, and there's still some ways in which that's going to be a shadow that's over us for some time. But the virus and its impact coming in was a series of change. The quarantine stay at home is a change, and now the coming back is a change. And so really this entire year is nothing but change. But that's okay. It keeps us out of our getting in a rut. It keeps us on our toes. It does exhaust us. And that's one of the reasons why we need to gather for worship, because that gives us some rest and some stability in the middle of all of this change. So that's part of the reason why worship really, really matters. So I hope that you'll be with us either online or in person. All right, I think those are the kind of announcements and small talk that we have for today. Good morning, Brenda. Good to see other folks that are on there watching. Jordan is excited. I know her family's excited about being here. Joanne says good morning. Juanice says hello. Marie says good morning. Susan says good morning. Debbie's there saying good morning as well. So great to see everyone there. Appreciate you being here. We have been, hey Wanda, good to see you as well this morning. We have been looking at the disciples, the 12 disciples, and trying to learn something about them as we look at them. And today we're going to look at the disciple named Thomas. And when we start to move into some of these disciples, that we begin to really see a personality develop around them. We kind of talked about some of these disciples that don't get mentioned much. They're just in the lists. Now that's as far as we know, but we know that God called them for a purpose and that they had a role that wasn't necessarily recorded, but it really, really mattered. But now we're going to start to move into these disciples that we have some backstory, we have some personality that we can see. For Thomas, we see him listed in the same place in almost all of the lists. He is paired up with the other disciple named Philip. Philip and Thomas seem to go together very often. It's interesting that John is the gospel that tells us almost everything that we know about Thomas. Now that's interesting because the gospel of John is written by the apostle but never identifies himself, and we'll talk about this later, but he always refers to himself as the disciple that Jesus loved, and we're going to unpack that later. But the writer of the Gospel of John doesn't reveal very much about himself at all, but we're going to find out that whatever his writing style and his particular perspective, he gives more details into the lives of the other disciples than the other gospel writers do. Every time that John mentions Thomas, he mentions one of his nicknames. Now it's interesting, Thomas has two different nicknames. One, the Apostle John gives him in the Gospel, and one we have given him. The nickname that John gives him is the nickname Didymus, or the twin. Now, that almost brings more mystery than it does anything else, because who was his twin? Where was his twin? Where did his twin go? Did his twin follow Jesus? What was the difference? Were they identical twins? All kinds of questions, and all we know is that his nickname, every time that he is mentioned, is the twin. Here comes Thomas, the twin, which is just really interesting. Usually, twin is not a singular word, but here it has been for the most part. Now, the nickname that we have given him is not Didymus or the twin, but the nickname that we have given him is Doubting Thomas. And we're going to talk about that just for a moment and see whether that's really a fair title. John mentions Thomas three different places: in John chapter 11, John chapter 14, and in John chapter 20. In John chapter 11, the word is that Lazarus is sick, and they are asking Jesus to come to the outskirts of Jerusalem to care for Lazarus. And the disciples say, no, you can't do that. We can't go to Judea because they're trying to kill you. And Jesus says, listen, it's okay. I'm in charge of timing. I'm in charge of what happens here. And at the end of that conversation, as he determines he is going to go see Lazarus, is at the end of that conversation in chapter 11, verse 16, it says, so Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him, talking about Jesus. Now, it's interesting, some folks have identified this as Thomas's courage, that he says, I'm ready to die with Jesus. Yeah, I guess you could read it that way. I'm not sure that that's the way that I read it. I kind of see it maybe as sarcastic. I see it a little bit as resigned. Listen, we've signed up to follow Jesus. We're kind of put ourselves in the same boat that he has, literally in some cases. We put ourselves in the same boat, so we are stuck. And if Jesus is going to go do this irresponsible thing, then I guess we're all going to have to go and die with him. Not exactly, in my mind, when I read that, the most courageous or bold position that he takes. In John chapter 14, we see Thomas again. Jesus is giving a word to the disciples, and this is the great passage, I go and prepare a place for you. And Jesus says to him, you know the way to where I'm going. And Thomas says, Lord, we do not know where you're going, so how can we know the way? I love that statement because sometimes you'll be sitting in class and the professor or the teacher will say, okay, everybody understands? And everybody's like, yeah, everybody understands, knowing that nobody in the room understands. But you're getting deeper and deeper in hot water because no one wants to say, question, I don't understand any of this. Could you back up and say this again? Thomas is the guy that bails out the whole rest of the disciples and saying, no, we don't know the way to where you're going because we don't even know where you're going. We have no clue what you're talking about. So how can we know the way? So I appreciate Thomas asking that question. And then in John chapter 20, and this is the place where Thomas really picks up that nickname of Doubting Thomas. John chapter 20, beginning in verse 24, it says, now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger in the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe. Sounds like doubt to me. 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, in large measure because they were afraid there was still danger, the doors were locked. Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. And this is great. He turns to Thomas and says, put your finger here and see my hands. Put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe. Thomas answered him and said, my Lord and my God. And Jesus said to him, have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and have yet believed. I want to just take a couple of quick words here. One of the things I would say, what do we do with this idea of Thomas as the doubting disciple? I would just want to point out to you that belief is not always a straight line. It is not, someone told me about Jesus right here, and from that moment on, I just believed more and more and more, and I got everything right, and I kept going. That's not the case. We talked about that Sunday with Nicodemus. It is sometimes our journey of belief is some lefts and some rights and some ups and some downs, and there are spurts of belief, and there are some spurts of disbelief. In fact, one of the things that I would want you to know is that doubting places can become our strongest places. Now listen, I'm not encouraging you to be a doubter, but I want to recognize the fact that sometimes we do have doubts. Sometimes we have theological doubts. Sometimes we have doubts about the meaning or the teaching of Scripture. Sometimes we have our own personal doubts and saying, man, this is really, really hard. This is difficult. I'm experiencing hardship. I wonder where God is in this moment. Those are doubts. And so we're not encouraging doubts, but I want you to know that faith isn't always a straight line. And I want you to know that some of our doubting places can become our strongest places. You see, there's one thing that I really love about doubt, is that doubt takes things seriously. Doubt takes the object seriously. Well, we don't doubt things that are a joke. Well, we don't doubt people that we never believed in to begin with. But what doubt says is that this word, this action, this promise, this teaching is serious. And in fact, it's so serious, it's worth really coming around and taking a look at and saying, can this really be true? So I would say that there are some folks that may never call themselves doubters. But that's because they've never really looked at how large the teaching, the word, the act, the promise, the works of God are. And so those who doubt have at least looked at it and said, whoa, that's really, really big. And I don't know whether that's possible, but at least they've recognized how big the promise, the word, the act of God is. I think that as we take these doubting places, they can become some of our strongest places. In fact, take a look at what happens there with Thomas. Jesus shows up and says, I heard you, Thomas. I heard that you said that you would never believe unless you saw with your own eyes and touched with your own hands. Well, here you are, touch away. Well, that had to be a tough moment for Thomas to get called on that carpet there. But what I want you to see is that he moves from being doubting Thomas to proclaiming Thomas, because he comes up with this profound statement, my Lord and my God. See, that doubt now has become one of the strongest statements that we find in all of the Gospels. Now, I would also just say one more thing, that there's always going to be a call for faith. There's always going to be a call that there are at some point in time that there's going to be a step of faith in what we believe. It's interesting, I've been listening on an audiobook to some Abraham Lincoln stories. And Abraham Lincoln actually comes to one of his friends. This is during his presidency, and his friend is reading the Bible and struggling with some things in the Bible. And Abraham Lincoln says, boy, what a profound book. And the friend is a little bit of a skeptic, and he's not so sure. And what his word is, boy, I love how he says this. He says, take everything that you can in that book by reason. Let your mind, the logic, wrap your head around. Take everything you can in that book by reason. And the rest of it, take by faith. And that's what we're called to do. We are called to examine. We are called to take a look at it. Thomas is called to say, I need to see it with my own eyes. But at the end of the day, at some point in time, it is always going to require a faith step. See, we are saved through that faith step, believing in what Jesus Christ has done. In the end there of the Thomas story in John chapter 20, Jesus is grateful for Thomas's proclamation, but he says, blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. So it's okay to experience and wrestle with some doubt, and sometimes it's a healthy thing saying that you're actually paying attention to what's being said. But at some point in time, we are all going to have to move from reason, doubt, to belief and say, based on everything that I know, I'm willing to take this one step past what I know into what I accept and what I believe. I'm glad that there's a disciple like Thomas. First of all, he asked this great question, where are you going? How do we know how to get there? We don't know where you're going. And that's where Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Again, his doubt drew out from Jesus the clarity of an even more precise answer that we needed to hear. I love the fact that Thomas exists. He asks questions that people need to ask. He wrestles with this. He's on this journey. but he does not finish in doubt. He moves from doubt to faith. I don't know where you are. I don't know where your struggle may be, whether it's intellectual, whether it's emotional, whatever it may be. But I want you to know it's okay to walk through some of those times. I want you to know that God will meet you in those times. But I also want you to move from reason to doubting. And I want you to know that there is no expression and encounter with God that does not involve some mystery, that does not involve some stepping out beyond what I know by faith. That's what God calls on us to do. All right, that's Thomas. I hope that that's been an encouragement to you. I don't think there's going to be a Whitney's World this afternoon. A little bit of a schedule change on that. Brian will be back tomorrow with his Hope Moment, and then Susan and I will be back on Friday morning. So that's the schedule for now. All right, have a great day. If you need anything, give us a call, text us, message us. We love to hear from you, and have a super day.